No, there is not.
Tom doesn't have a printed version of
But
his
most-
PowerPoint. He does the handouts in your notebook. We've given you several of those University of Tennessee and other publications that go along.
Yeah,
What
and
you're
most all this data will come from that. So, pleasure to be here today, and basically it's been a great day for me to learn more about the annuals and all. But as Ray said, I want to talk a little bit about the natives and some of the work we're doing there. And having worked with Dr. Smith for over 10 years now, he's ingrained in me that one of the best tools we have at the University of Kentucky is our Forage website. And I know many of you have seen this, but I always come back to it because there's just always a plethora of good information there about the program. Certainly you see the one that we're working through today, the one we had yesterday, and so forth. So I encourage you to keep track of that. I use this certainly for Forage publications. Most all the publications that you see in your notebook came from here. I'll show you that. Again, some of the native warm season grass work that we see there. The UT publications that Ray was mentioning, you'll find in your notebook as well. So just a good place to go if you've ever got questions about native warm seasons or basically any forages or any forage work that we do here at the university, and then other stuff around the country. So I often encourage you to go there. I want to touch base just on a little bit of work that we're doing that kind of dovetails with the research I'm going to talk about from Dr. Pat Kaiser at UT. But we're currently working on a study in southeastern Kentucky. Chris Teutsch would know where this is. This is down in Breathitt County. And we're working with native warm season grasses there. We have 4 sites on Robinson Forest land down there. And you can see this is one of the plots. These are roughly 20 acres each. Again, this is one of the plots. This is another one of the plots right here. We have a long, narrow plot right down here, and then another plot here in the back. But as you can see, it's some pretty rough country that we're trying to get these things established on, and we've had very good success there. So the point I just really wanted to make there was the fact that if we can establish those things here on these conditions with these poor soils, and when I mean poor, I mean really poor soils, mainly rock, pHs of 3.8, 3.9 up to about 5, 5.2, something like that. So really, really poor conditions, but we've had very good luck there. Now we've seen this chart already today in a couple of different instances, and wanted to bring it up here because I think it tells us a little bit. We've talked about warm season annual grasses for the most part today, but what I'm going to be focusing on right here is the perennial grasses, the warm seasons. And again, anything that we can do to increase that grazing season. Tommy just got through talking about grazing corn, what benefits that gives us to increase our grazing days and that type of thing. So I want to touch a little bit in wrapping up this afternoon about some of these warm season perennials. And why do we even talk about these things? These are some of the species that we're mentioning when we do our work. Tommy was mentioning this right here. I've done quite a bit of work with switchgrass, but the ones we're focusing on the project we're doing now, and you can see some cattle down there grazing on that, are big blue, little blue, and Indian. There's switchgrass work going on as well, a lot of eastern gamma grass that's going on. But again, these things are going to be around. Why do we think about these? Most of you are very familiar with all these, but they are native to Kentucky, to Tennessee, to Virginia, to Georgia. And so we know they'll take our soils, but more importantly, I think, is they'll take our climate. They'll take our humidity, they'll take our heat and those type of things. They're very drought tolerant. They utilize water extremely well. That bodes well for us in years like 2007, 2008, 2010, 2012. So even though we've had a fairly wet year the last couple of years, we know we're going to have droughts again, and these species really do well in those environments. Low inputs, when we talk about fertility and so forth, we've got some of our switchgrass plots on some very steep slopes up in Bracken County, northern Kentucky, Boyd County, some that I wouldn't want to get on with a tractor, I'll guarantee you that. Again, I mentioned some of the pH, the low pHs that we can get by with. We don't advocate that. We'd like to have a pH of 5.5 to 6 if we could get it, But if we don't have that, we've still got a chance to produce some really top quality forage. Again, our P and K don't have to be extremely high. We don't want them extremely low, but it's not something that's going to be a real problem if we don't get it up there like we would say in a crop like corn or alfalfa or that type of thing. Another real thing that I like about these species is that they're multi-purpose. We can certainly use them for grazing. That's going to be the focus of what we're talking about, but we can certainly cut them for hay. We can use them for energy, as was mentioned earlier. There was some push back in the early 2000s for energy and those type of things, and that's what we did a lot of our switchgrass work with. But just wanted to touch on the fact that these just they don't just fit in one little folder. You know, we can open that folder up. The main thing here I think we want to talk about is that they are perennial. They come back year after year after year. If we manage them correctly. Mainly we've heard about annuals today, and annuals, of course, we have to reseed those every year, year after year after year. If we do these correctly, we get these established, they're going to come back. They're going to come back for hopefully 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. So, but we do have to manage them correctly. Just a couple of other things there that make them good, I think, in a lot of different situations for wildlife and so forth. I mentioned Dr. Pat Kaiser, and that's really what I want to focus on for the few minutes I've got left. A lot of the work was done at their Center for Native Grasslands there at the University of Tennessee. I've enjoyed working with him and his team of colleagues there at UT on the work we're doing there in Breathitt County. They've done a lot of work with this, grazing warm season grasses to complement the tall fescue system. When we go do county meetings here in Kentucky, one of the things that I know Ray asked and that I always try to ask, I ask farmers, how many people do not have fescue on their farm? And virtually no one ever raises their hand, which is good because that means they're telling me the truth. But a lot of times when we have tall fescue and we have drought years like this photo was actually taken in Jessamine County back in 2008. And again, you can see it's been grazed into the ground quite a bit. And these warm season natives gives us the opportunity to prevent some of this if we want to, but have another tool in our tool belt to get us around things like that. Here's again a list of some of the benefits for these things. I won't go through all of them. I want to get out to the field, but again, that drought resiliency we talked about, calving rates and birth weights, those have been mentioned earlier today, heifer developments, getting away from purchase feeds if at all possible, some opportunities for stockpiling these along with tall fescue and the other things there. So I think it's a good opportunity for us, especially when we're trying to get more grazing days. Again, these are some of the species we're talking about: switchgrass, big blue, Indian grass mix, and eastern gamagrass. Again, I mentioned the work we're doing down there is primarily big blue, little blue, and Indian. So we don't have that same mixture in this work here that they've done down there, but they do have some replicated data for a few years, which gives us some power in our statistics. Again, switchgrass, the 3 years, and the average over here. So when we look at these natives, we're looking at 2 pounds of gain per day on average here if we've got this species. And a lot of the annuals, the work that we saw earlier today, if we're in this range in those summer months, that's pretty good work. Now this is some switchgrass work right here, monoculture of switchgrass, and these are stocking rates over here on the left of pounds of beef per acre, and then over here on the right, probably a little tough to see here, the solid white line is the average of those 3 years. 2010 is the black line, 11 and 12, you can see those. So when they started out with the switchgrass, started out in early May, the first year in 2010, they only had about 1,200 pounds of beef per acre there. So a relatively low stocking rate, and you can see that as the grass began to grow, this was a put and take system, so they began to put more animals on there, and then as we got later into the season, you know, the animals got bigger, they were consuming more each day, and they had to drop those numbers down and so forth. Again, they came back in 2011, they said, well, we're going to start out about in this, you know, range down here, maybe 3 500-pound animals, and then they really bumped those up as that grass got bigger, but they had to come back off of that fairly quickly to get back down here. 2012, they pretty much got it right that year. You can see they pretty much hit the average in that 2012. They learned how to get the animals on there when the forage was on there. They knew they were going to have to take them off and so forth. So we get a lot of grazing. Again, this is early May, gets us out to about end of July. And you can see the average daily gains here. So early on, we're pushing 3 pounds. And then as we go longer into the season, the grasses begin to play out. Again, we get more stems in there, we get more fiber and that type of thing. Our yields do go down. But again, these first two here, well, even all three of them are pretty good numbers till we get out here till the very end and so forth. This is Big Blue Indian grass, the mix that we talked about. A little bit of difference here. This was the average of both years, and they got that pretty good right there. So again, we started in May, and they kept the cattle going there about 1,000 pounds. They got all the way up to about 1,400, and so really good opportunity there. See if we've got our daily gains again. We started out about the same. If you remember our switchgrass, we were just about the same, and as we go back, those numbers were pretty much the exact same as we go through the grazing season on that. This is some bred heifer work. Again, different species blended here, but on dairy heifer performance, not too bad. We don't want to be, from what I understand, up above a couple of pounds a day, so we fall into that good range. You can see here out, this is switchgrass right here. Those dairy heifers are pretty tall. You can see she's in some pretty tall material right there. And grazing that, these were about 1,050 pounds and 967 Angus steers over this study in the 2 locations. This is some eastern gamma grass work compared with Sudex. So a perennial with an annual here. And again, you can see our stocking rates up above 2,000 pounds per acre with the eastern gamma grass. So we'd have 400 or 500 pound steers on there. Again, 2-year study, 13, 14, compared with the Sudex. So we've heard a lot about the annuals today, and that's great, but I think these perennials do give us some opportunity to help with the programs we have. These are the grazing heights that the cattle were put in on these different studies. And you can see 13 and 14, we're talking about a 2-year study. The first year we went in here, 13, when we put the cattle in there, pretty high, and then when we got them off again, it was still, above 20, 25 inches. Came back in 2014, lowered that down in terms of when we put them on there and then when we took them off. But what I want to mention on this slide is the fact that when we talk to farmers about using natives, we have to get them to change their mind on management. So many of our farmers here in Kentucky are used to tall fescue and how we abuse tall fescue, and we graze it into the ground and that type of thing. We can't do that with these native warm seasons. We absolutely have to manage them better. Those gains we were looking at in the slides before were really good gains, but they don't come free of charge, okay? And where we have to make that up is in management. And getting them on there at the right time, getting them off of there at the right time is so important to making these things stay in stand. Just some more stuff here, some data on the eastern gamma grass in terms of average daily gain. You can look at those bars and see what we've got here on the right. Won't spend a lot of time on that. Again, this is heifer grazing days. So you can see here we've got a little bit of advantage to the Sudex in the 2013 in animal performance average daily gain. You go here, we've got grazing days. We're getting a lot more grazing days with the perennial than we do the annual. Okay, so again, kind of a trade-off there. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on this. We want to get through there. Nice, really good. Again, this is switchgrass. We're getting, when we get them in there, we turn them on when we've got the right type of canopy versus once we rotate them off, if we turn back in there too quickly, we're going to lower that down to about over a pound a day on that. So getting them in there at the right stage and getting them off at the right stage is so critical. And that's one of the main challenges we're going to have here in Kentucky when we get farmers using these species on their farms. So our best management, he says made easy here, but I don't, getting that ingrained into farmers' heads is going to be a little bit tougher. when to get off and on those. I mean, again, we're usually used to grazing our fescue down to almost nothing. We've got to change that mindset. We've got to keep that stand vigor. Again, this is some more switchgrass. 17 days after they'd gotten off of it, and you can see the regrowth, and we'll be ready to go back in there before too long. Talks about continuous grazing here. I'm not going to focus a lot on that, but again, you can see the pounds per acre of live animal. I don't really want to talk about that because this is just kind of a caveat to what they've been doing there, and I really think we want to focus on the rotational grazing part of it. Again, the stocking, you can see the 3 different blends over here, some of the stocking rates that they've had with the switchgrass, the Big Blue and Indian, and so forth. Just some more of the continuous versus the heavy stocking and the rotational grazing there. Again, we'll keep that, but you can see there is a difference of about 35 pounds when we stock it heavily and rotationally graze it versus the continuous grazing there. A nice group of looking animals there. I want to touch just a little bit about patch burn grazing. This is actually some of the stuff that we're doing up at Breathitt County that I showed you earlier on. We're actually burning a third of our pastures. We've got 20 acres in those pastures that I was telling you about. We're burning about a third of those in 2 of the plots. In 4 of the plots, we're just using rotational grazing with polywire. And, going the wrong way again. And so this picture right here shows you, or can you tell where the burn stopped and where it began? This was our fire break right here. You can see that. And the theory is that these natives were present in Kentucky when the settlers got here. Obviously, they were more present in the Great Plains and all, and the Indians and the buffalo kind of knew how to manage them with fire, and sometimes lightning would strike them and all, but the theory is that if we burn a third of the field each year and not put any electric fence in, they will actually do their own rotational grazing without us having to do the fencing. Really going to be interesting to see how this turns out, because you can see they've definitely been favoring where the burn was up here on your right. Again, we turned them in there after the burn. The material was about this tall when we turned them in, about 8 to 10 inches. But they have stayed there. It's hard to see in this picture, but you can see that we've got quite a few Indian grass seed heads in here. They tend to select the Big Blue and Little Blue versus the Indian. We get the cattle off next week, as a matter of fact, so I'm going to be interested to see if they're actually going to play out the Big Blue and Little Blue and focus or leave the Indian grass there, because there's not been the pressure on the Indian grass. Even in this area where we didn't have the patch burn, they're selectively taking out the Big Blue and the Little Blue versus the Indian grass. So to wrap things up a little bit, lots of contributions that these species can make with backgrounding, stockering, different things that we can do. We get good calving rates, we get good body conditions. We don't have the toxicosis issue that we have with tall fescue. These things do really well in the drought. We talked about that at the very beginning about why we want to use these species, get improved weaning weights, and at the end of the day, I think they are a good tool in our toolbox, or tool belt, if you will, to supplement our cool season forages, which are so prevalent here in Kentucky. We can use it as an alternative warm season forage. Drought tolerance, again, the lower inputs. When we talked about some of the annuals, we were talking about high nitrogen rates, even some equal to that of corn. Certainly not necessary on these species. Stocking rates are as comparable to those. Whoops. And, we would encourage you to start small. Tommy's talked about, doing corn, how they started out doing maybe 5 acres of corn and grazing that one year and then building that up. And certainly if you're thinking about using some of these natives, that's what I'd recommend you do, is start small, 5 acres, 4 acres, something like that. Use those in your rotation, see how that works. Maybe use some poorer ground, some marginal ground. I told you about some of the soils that we had there, maybe an unproductive area on your farm that you're not getting the production out of that you want to. But just think about that as an opportunity to go along with your cool season species, to go along with the annuals that we've heard about today. And with that, Ray, we'll take any questions that anybody might have. Kind of rushed through that, but I know we need to get to the farm.
Before you ask Tom a question, Austin's going to pass out the surveys. I think it'll be easier to get those done before we get to the field. So go ahead and be filling that out as we're closing up with questions for Tom and a couple of other announcements I have.
Okay. Yeah. Chad?
One question, Tom. Has anyone looked, once you have a stand of gamma grass or whatever established, can you seed in the fall or the spring some cool seasons, some clovers, some small grains, to get production on that same acre?
Right.
Awesome.
There's work going on that, interseeding clovers and some other species there. It can be done. We can actually, once these things go dormant at the end of the year, we can actually get in there and graze them much like you would corn. One of the concerns I have is getting too many animals in there and mucking it up. It's so vigorous and all in the following year, though, I'm not sure how good they stay in stand. I would ask Chris or Dennis, even Ray, if y'all could comment on that. I mean, we've had success in getting them established. How long they stay in after that tends to be.
Well, in our experience, those that we have the most long-term with the eastern cameragrass, and it sticks around quite a bit, quite well under grazing. I was on a farm visit in Fulton County, Georgia, which is Atlanta, okay? And it was a sheep farm. They said, come over, I want you to see this grass. I want you to identify this grass. There was a patch probably about as big as this carpet area down there that was eastern gamma grass. That was not planted there by them, at least. It's been there for eons, apparently, there and just outside of Atlanta. So it does last for quite a while, under pretty intense grazing. I mean, they weren't just playing around. They were grazing sheep there for milk production for cheese.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work that we've got left to do on these. I mean, they're just now making the comeback. Like I said, early 2000s. I mean, there's been some work done all along on them, but there's still a lot of work that we've got left to do on this. But there's
one answer to your question too is most of the interseeding of cool seasons into natives, it reduces the stand of the native. And we're not sure all the reasons, but one of the things would be if you're seeding rye in or annual ryegrass is you're grazing over the winter, so you have that trampling effect. Like you said, Tom, University of Tennessee is doing some more work with that to see if there's a good combination. Tommy, you all did red clover into eastern gamma grass.
Yes, sir.
Did the eastern gamma grass stay in that stand pretty well with that mixture of red clover and eastern gamma grass?
Well, the eastern gamma grass choked out the red clover.
Okay.
Yeah.
The nitrogen benefited it tremendously, and gamma grass thickened up even more.
Okay. So red clover into eastern gamma grass, because there's usually gaps in between it, that has seemed to work pretty well. Don't have a lot of research, but several producers have done that. But in the switchgrass and the big blue stem, we've not found a really good fit, at least as far as I know.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm from Southern Plains, and I graze big blue, little blue, Indian, switch, mix, forage. In Kentucky, what is your recommendation for, you said low inputs compared to others. So what's your nitrogen recommendation for native grasses in Kentucky?
About 60 to 90 pounds of nitrogen is where we would like to be. Work at UT and some work that we've actually done says that after about 90 pounds of nitrogen, somewhere between that 60 and 90 pounds of N. Now our P and K, obviously, when we want to take care of per soil test.
P and K, we typically try to keep in a medium range.
Yeah.
And under pasture, definitely 60 pounds, but even in some of our hay systems, we typically don't go over 90 pounds of nitrogen.
A lot of the thought in our part of the world is that native grasses don't require nitrogen. You don't have to fertilize them because they have deep root system and not fertilizing, they get lazy. And I know there's a lot of different misinformation or disinformation out there.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you're removing the forage, then you have to replace
Yeah.
Right.
some
Right.
of these. But 60 to 90 units would be pretty aggressive. I'm assuming you have a lot higher stocking rates than what we.
Well, that's what we're looking at down in southeastern Kentucky is what are some of our stocking rates and what can we handle with these species. And again, this is replicated at 3 sites. We have one site in Madison County at the Bluegrass Army Depot. Brandon Sears has been working with that project over there, and then they actually have another site there in Tennessee to complement the 2 we have here in Kentucky.
So one other question for you, but what is the origin? If a producer in Kentucky wants to establish big blue, little blue, Indian, or some native grass mixture, how far west can he go to get big blue, little blue, Indian that are going to be the same type native that you would recommend here?
Oh,
When does a native
right.
become a
We-
non-native?
A fair bit of what's planted here, well, I think our last source is Roundstone Native Seed,
Mhm.
and a lot of what we get from them is local ecotypes that they
Right.
collected and increased themselves. With switchgrass, cantaloupe we found to be something that handles any of our winter conditions, whereas alamo often doesn't. So we probably, not emphatically, but probably stay within about a 300-mile radius of origin, particularly east-west. We don't plant a lot that's very far south from here, if that answers the question.
But as he mentioned, Roundstone Native Seed has really worked on their production of local ecotypes and so forth, and that would be one source. Another one that we've worked with on our switchgrass is something from Blade Energy, but that was strictly on switchgrass. And but cantaloupe is what I did all my work with and so forth. And but we've been very successful in getting that project down in East Kentucky. We just actually broadcast the seed on top of the ground because it was so rough. There's no way you could have drilled anything into that. You wouldn't have gotten 50 feet and you'd have had the drill completely torn up. So we actually broadcast it on there and actually did very well. Yes, sir.
Mostly switchgrass that you're planting in the eastern part of the state?
It kind of depends. We had a focus for energy early on, and we were looking at monocultures of switchgrass, and we had 2 or 3 different varieties, primarily cantaloupe derivatives. But the grazing work and so forth, we've been looking at big blue, little blue, and Indian primarily, that mixture.
Have you guys had problems with like running that kind of seed through a conventional drill?
We make sure that we
Yeah.
have a seed box on the drill.
Yeah.
And even then, sometimes it still plugs up.
Yeah.
We're fortunate, we mentioned Roundstone Seed, they're very focused on getting a good clean seed product,
Yep.
and even things like Little Blue, taking some of the fluff off. So we've been fortunate that way. If you just buy seed from wherever, sometimes you get some really chaffy material.
And when we broadcast that seed, it was so like we actually mixed it with lime, and so we could get the fanning effect of it and so forth. But it didn't go very far. We actually had to just kind of go tractor tire to tractor tire to get through there. But